Welcome everybody. It is 11:55 Eastern Time, 9:55. Well, see, no, it would be 12:55 Eastern Time, 9:55 Pacific Time. We're glad you're with us. Feel free to check in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from, and we'll get started in about 5 minutes. If there are any questions that you have about acquisition, innovation, source selection, valuation factors, anything like that, that you'd like us to tackle today, something that is specific to you, something specific to what you're working on, go ahead and open up the Q&A pod. And you can go ahead and start dropping questions in the Q&A pod now. Once we get started with our presentation today, we are going to close down the chat and we will use the Q&A pod to gather questions. But for the time being, feel free to let us know where you're coming from in chat.
I think we have an award for this participant.
Where did you see?
Sarajevo, Bosnia Herzegovina.
Wow. Well, welcome. USAID in Bosnia. Glad you're here.
Mexico City as well.
And Miss Tiffany Hickson, welcome. Do you want to do a quick mic check?
And we're checking, check, live from Burien, Washington.
Nice. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. I'm good. No complaints.
Wonderful.
It's beautiful here in Seattle, except for if you don't have air conditioning, then it's not.
I heard that there were some excessive heat warnings, that it was getting up close to 90 degrees there.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be 95 or 96 today.
Wow.
That's legit, officially warm.
That is Seattle unbearable. Unless you have AC. Oh, we got another Seattleite. Hi, Sarah. Welcome. Nathaniel, I see your message in chat. You're welcome to send me an email. Unfortunately, after the webinar today, I will not be back to the office until mid-September. So feel free to drop an email. If you need something urgently from my team, send an email to CSAW, CSAW at gsa.gov, and my team will get back in touch with you. Otherwise, I'd be happy to talk with you in September. Spokane, hey, Mark, welcome. San Diego, Philadelphia, Arizona, Heidelberg, Germany. Wonderful.
Where are you going for vacation, Jonathan?
I'm actually going to Seattle, so I'm in California right now. So I'll be making the trek up to Seattle.
And I was in Italy and Switzerland last week, so I came back ready to go.
How's your Italian?
Not very good.
Fair enough.
Well, the Italians make it really easy to get around in Italy without speaking the language, which is really nice. They accommodate English speakers a lot, even other languages, especially in the train stations.
Yeah,
That's
fortunately,
nice.
we had two fluent Italian speakers with us. One was
nice.
local, so it made it so much easier for me not to have to embarrass myself.
Paula, we just finalized the slides about an hour before the presentation today, so we will make sure that those get shared out with everybody, and we will also be posting the slides to our CSAW Interact community on buy.gsa.gov. So if you're not a member of that community, head over to buy.gsa.gov, take a look around for the Interact communities, and sign up for the CSAW community. You'll get notified of all of our upcoming webinars and be able to get links to past webinar videos and presentations from those, as well as some fantastic articles that you'll see written there about performance-based acquisition, and all that fun stuff. So, folks, it is the top of the hour. It is 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. Let's go ahead and get started. We've got Tiffany Hickson here with us and Trevor Wagner. And we've got a great webinar planned for you today on source selection, innovations, and evaluation. So the purpose of today's session really is to highlight innovation, innovative practices that you can use. This is not some foreign, unattainable thing that some special people in some small pockets of government are using and they're inaccessible to you. No, they are for you. We've got some great innovations that we want to share with you around source selection. And I'm going to be pushing Trevor today to help us understand how some of these innovations can be used here in the fourth quarter, right? It's August. It's literally a month and a half before the end of the fiscal year. So we know if you're joining us and you're in 1102, we know you're busy. So we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be here. There are a lot of resources in this presentation deck, which is why we will go to great lengths to ensure that you get a copy of this presentation, because we're not going to be able to cover every single resource that's linked in here. But thanks to Trevor, he's linked a lot of great resources to check out. We'll go through many of them today. But I also want to put this on the table. You've got an excellent acquisition expert here, an acquisition innovation advocate at Department of Commerce, a former PIL coach. And so if you have questions about the applicability of these to something you're doing, if you want to drop a specific challenge in the Q&A, we're ready to tackle that. I'm going to throw the hard questions at Trevor and make him do his best to answer them. So bring it on, folks. This is going to be more of a fireside type training. We will go through the slide deck today and talk about all the different source selection innovations, but we want to engage you. We want to hear from you.
Hey, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Real quick, I did put a copy of the slides in the chat, but there's so many people, 240 or so. You have to, if it was put on there before you joined, you won't be able to see it. All right, so we'll put it on again towards the end. For the folks who were here a few minutes ago and beyond, I uploaded it in there. You can download the slides and you can follow along and access the live resources as you would. But just for my 1 cent before Tiffany comes in, ask us anything. That's why we're here. We wanted to show you that each slide has a dedicated resources tab built out specifically for it. And we call it a fourth quarter buzzer beater. You know, we're trying to get everything in. We're trying to beat the buzzer. We like sports metaphors. So go ahead and ask us anything. Back to you.
All right. For those of you who don't have access to chat in Zoom or otherwise can't download a file from Zoom, we totally understand. We are the government after all, and all of us have different access to Zoom and the technology that it offers us. So again, we will make sure we post that. If you scroll back up and through chat, you'll see that Carla has posted a link to our Interact community where you can click on that and sign up to get notified once we post the presentation over there. Folks, we are incredibly fortunate to be joined today by Ms. Tiffany Hickson, who is the Assistant Commissioner for Federal Acquisition Service Office of Professional Services and Human Capital categories. She is also the government-wide category executive for the Professional Services category. Tiffany has a long expert resume in acquisition throughout her career. And we're very excited to have her here today to give us some opening remarks. Tiffany, welcome. Glad to have you.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. And thank you for setting up today's webinar on source selection, innovation, and evaluation. It's a really great topic. And as you know, acquisition innovation is really near and dear to my heart. Jonathan did a really great job of laying out some very specific talking points, which he knows are really just like a serving suggestion for me, because I tend to be even an innovative speaker. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. But before I get into my comments, I wanted to formally welcome Trevor Wagner, who is the director for the lab at the Department of Commerce. Mr. Wagner is an expert in acquisition innovation and a member of the Acquisition Innovation Advocates Council. And Trevor, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time out to share your knowledge with the larger federal acquisition community. I do have a very soft spot for the Commerce Department. I am an alumnus of Commerce. I spent a little over 15 years at the department, split between kind of half and half between NOAA, where I started my career as a contract specialist, and at Commerce headquarters, where I served as a procurement analyst, supporting the procurement executive there, and then also as a director for the headquarters procurement function there at Commerce. And while we did some innovative things back then, I must say that the work that you're doing in the lab to facilitate innovation really has taken it to the next level. It's just so impressive. And again, I'm just really grateful that you're here with us today. The one message I would like the community to take away from me today is I'm an example of where innovation can get you. both the good and the challenging of that. And I have really had the fortunate experience really throughout my entire career. And I've been with the federal government for 34 years, the majority of which have been in contracting or on the program side of the house. And I was really fortunate to work for leaders who allowed us to take chances and supported us in doing that. Sometimes taking chances can be really uncomfortable. You know, if the FAR doesn't say you are allowed to do this, right? It can be a little uncomfortable to lean forward because there can be risk there. You may not necessarily have a senior contracting officer or manager that is comfortable with taking that risk, or your counsel may not be comfortable in taking some of those risks. But really thinking through how to manage the risks and what the mission benefits are, right, to both industry and your agency's mission sets are really the point of innovation. It isn't innovation for innovation's sake. It's actually innovation to help us reduce costs, deliver mission more quickly, deliver better products and services to support the mission, and innovation can really help us to get there. But that means sometimes you have to take chances, and sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. There was a very large IDIQ contract program, for example, when I was at the Department of Commerce, that we were trying some pretty innovative things on. We went right up to the edge of doing an unpriced IDIQ contract, and the Court of Federal Claims said, too far. You got to go back and redo that. So sometimes you try hard things, right? And the court and others may come back and say, hey, you pushed that a little bit too far. And when you have managers, or if you are a manager, and support those types of risks, in the end, right, what happened is that we moved the ball forward in terms of how we were thinking about awarding big IDIQ government-wide GWACs at the time. There were some real benefits that came out of that process, even if it wasn't perfect. So, I really want you to think about some of the innovations that are going to be presented today. And while they may seem risky, there's real goodness in them because they are delivering faster, more effectively, and better supporting the mission set. And experts like Trevor can really help attest to what those benefits look like in a concrete way. It isn't just pie in the sky kind of stuff. These are things that have been tested at the Department of Commerce or at DHS. I also worked at DHS after I worked at the Department of Commerce. And we tried a number of very innovative acquisition techniques. And it's important, right, to feel secure in being able to do those things. They make a difference. Even in my job here at GSA, we have not stopped trying new things. And while my team manages big government-wide stuff, there is still room for improvement and trying new acquisition techniques. And we're in the throes of awarding a big new government-wide contract called Oasis Plus, and we are trying some pretty innovative techniques. It was actually more innovative when we started out in terms of vetting our acquisition strategy. And as an example of sometimes you can't get everybody there. We had some pretty innovative ideas baked into the initial strategy, and we weren't able to get all the things that we wanted, but we were able to get a number of the things that we wanted. There were also some recent court decisions that have impacted our acquisition strategy. And you know what? That's okay. We're going to adjust and implement the innovations that we're able to do. So really just wanted to give that kind of cheerleader rah-rah speech. It's important to remain creative, think about new things, be forward thinking in terms of your approaches, and really listen to the challenge and the problem your program office or mission set is trying to solve. And procurement can be a huge driver and facilitator in solving those problems. Your role is super, super important if you're on the contracting side of the house. So Jonathan, did you want me to read any of the other things that are in your talking points, or was that okay?
That's wonderful, Tiffany. Thank you. And
go team, go.
Yes.
Go team procurement, go acquisition professionals. It's good stuff. But I in closing, because I could go on, and Jonathan knows that. That's why he tries to time these things, because I could just go on and on and on. I really just wanted to thank Jonathan for teeing up today's discussion, for inviting the great guest speakers that we have, and I hope you're all really able to share some techniques as a community and really talk through those. It's great, Jonathan. You're doing this as really more a fireside chat. It's certainly a lot more interesting than having formal prepared remarks.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a nice mix of both. We've got some prepared stuff and slides, but yeah, this is not easy stuff to do, and as you alluded to, not everything you want to do comes to fruition, at least maybe not the first time you try it.
That's right.
So learning how to try things in different ways and adapt. And I really appreciated what you said about this process being about managing risk. And I think we're going to get into that more today, that around how to use innovative strategies instead of trying to play the game of building out every single possible constraint throughout your contract, tying the hands of your vendors to one single path forward, using the source selection innovations and acquisition innovations to manage that risk, to allow for efficiencies and best practices. So
yeah, I think Jonathan, just one comment on that, which is, thank you for bringing that up too. I think we tend to want to eliminate 100% of risk in going through a procurement. And I think that is just it's impossible. I think we just convince ourselves that it is possible. It's about managing the risk, understanding what you're going to do if that risk is realized, what is plan B, baking in, some flexibility and time to address whether those risks are realized. It's okay. You may get a protest, right? If you're trying something really new, you just need to make sure that you're baking in time to get through, right, that adjudication process. So don't be afraid of risk. That's like my big takeaway. You're gonna realize it regardless. So just figure out how to manage it well.
Awesome. Well, Tiffany, thanks so much. You're welcome to stick around. We'd love to have you. I gotta
go.
All right. Fair enough. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
All right.
There's
bye.
my Italian for you. Ciao.
All right.
Arrivederci.
Have a great conversation.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
All right. So we are going to get into some techniques. Our first technique.
Well, hold on, Jonathan. Before we do that,
you want to answer, Omar?
Let's pick up where Tiffany left off, right?
Okay.
Risk. This is a big one. It plays into everything that we're going to talk about. All of the techniques, the role of the innovation space is meant to find ways to decrease burden, increase successful mission support, but also to alleviate risk. I see a lot of these as flat out reducing risk across the board. But whenever we try something that we're not used to, it's risky because it's a new process. We haven't done it before. That's the role and value of so many coaches and innovation experts. If you're at a civilian agency or even in the DoD, your agency likely has an acquisition innovation advocate you can reach out to have some of these discussions, maybe using something for a first time. You'll see in the resources built out on each slide, there are paths that have already been carved out for you to follow, for you to mimic, or for you just to use as a reference as you're building your own unique and creative solution. But one of the very, very, very smart, forward-thinking individuals I worked with early on in my career used to say that if you put this much risk, you introduce this much risk, you might get this much in benefits. But if you eliminate it all, you're eliminating all of those possible benefits as well. So that's something that I certainly carry with me as I talk to leaders in the government or individual procurement teams is risk is okay. We have to mitigate it to get the benefits and not avoid it altogether. It is a crucially important principle as we talk through innovation and acquisition. He's on mute. It's not me.
All right. I owe money for the money jar. And Tiffany was talking about protest risk. And what I typically tell people, and I'll tell all of you this right now, there is nothing, absolutely nothing you can do to prevent a protest. Now, there's plenty you can do to prevent a forest fire, but there's nothing you can do to prevent protest. If an unsuccessful vendor or a vendor during the solicitation phase decides that there's something they want to protest and they want to front the money for it, they can do it. So instead, we focus on documentation and we focus on ensuring that our approach is common sense. And so we're going to talk about some fairly straightforward innovations, some very cool techniques. And as Trevor said, as we allow for there to be some risk, we are trusting industry to an extent. And by trusting industry, we're allowing them the opportunity to bring additional innovation into the execution process. We're allowing them to bring their best practices, their efficiencies. So there's a huge benefit to allowing for there to be some risk. So let's talk about how we get there. How do we get to execution? We put together our requirements. We've thought through our performance standards, but now we've got to pick the right vendor. As we all know, when you're doing a source selection process, the traditional, right, the one that everybody gets trained on, everyone gets warned about, is you're going to get this big old stack of paper from a bunch of different vendors. And by paper, I mean digital paper, because now everything's digital. But you've got to review dozens of pages of proposal, and it's tedious, right? But what are some of the things that we can do to streamline that source selection process? Let's check out our first technique here, on-the-spot consensus. Trevor, what is on-the-spot consensus, and how does it help us in the source selection process?
I've heard this labeled as a small but mighty technique that can save the government a ton of time in the process. And really, one of the best ways to do it is to kind of mimic what it looks like. So we'll do that in a second. Jonathan, you, me, and a robot. I think there's a couple animations built in, but not yet. But really, this process is one where we skip individual evaluator reports. You don't need them. They're not required anywhere in the FAR or in most local agency policies. And you go straight to consensus. And that's really what an on-the-spot consensus looks like. So think if you are reading a bunch of experience volumes, maybe they're 5 pages each. You give your evaluators, say, hey, take Wednesday, read through all 10 of those 5-page PDFs, come prepared Thursday at 10 a.m., and we are going to knock out all 10 of those consensus evaluations. We're going to build the evaluation reports together, no individual reports, And then once we're done with that 2-hour session, all 10 reports are done. They are finalized. We have our hot wash, and we are done with all of our phase 1 reports. Right. So I think most folks usually see the immediate impact. Go ahead.
So typically, you get this giant stack of papers, and the contracting officer tells me, if I'm a member of the technical evaluation board, they tell me, hey, sit down, read this, and as you read it, write down your observations, look at the evaluation factors in section M, and start, noting whether they've hit those marks. And I have to do that for every proposal. And what you're saying is, no, all I've got to do as an evaluation board member is read through all the proposals, have my internal gut check, and come ready to discuss with the rest of the board.
That's certainly an approach. I think most folks take a few nominal notes, but I do have an example later of what a finalized report looks like. So when you see the finalized report, your notes might be even more concise than that, right? So they can be very brief. And a lot of times it's really just a physical pen and paper at this point, because sometimes we start getting on a computer and our 90 words a minute fingers are just going all over the place and we're saying too much. And we really want to check into, look at our evaluation criteria. Maybe with this 5-page experience volume, it's just a question or two. And then you go ahead and, all right, this is what's increasing or decreasing my confidence. So we'll have increased or decreased confidence later. But that gets to a good question from Kevin Fralish. So do we state, and remember, we kept the chat pod open so we could have good dialogue, but if you do have a specific question, it'll be much easier for us to capture it if you put it in the Q&A. So we'll try to capture the chat first, but the chat kind of disappears on us. So please put good questions in the Q&A. So we'll answer them live, or we'll type our answer in there. So just to share a couple of them, Kevin asked, do we state that the evaluation process will be on the spot consensus? So how about this? Look at our 4th quarter buzzer beater. No language is required in the solicitation. Right? So even if you've already issued something and you're having an internal team dialogue, right, you can switch to this style. You just want to be sure you coordinate with your team ahead of time. So this is one of those really good, even if you didn't plan for it immediately, you can go ahead and introduce this later on.
So Trevor, one of the ways I've seen teams do this, I'll give 2 examples. One is for the kind of the traditional written proposal, where the team all looks at one proposal at a time. And everybody looks at that proposal, they read through it. Once everybody's done reading through that first proposal, at that point, the team takes a consensus check on how they evaluate it. And then once they've documented the team's decision, they go on to the next proposal. Do you have any thoughts on your initial example was everybody reads through all of them and then you come through and just kind of grind out the ratings, but what about that kind of going proposal by proposal approach?
Okay, so how about everybody's read? We're coming prepared that Thursday at 10 a.m. to do our consensus checks. We have a really good, solid facilitator who has done all of this. We have a scribe and a note taker to document the actual consensus report. It's good maybe not to have a member of the tech team lead that part of the process. Maybe it's an independent note taker or the contract specialist that's there with the team facilitating this event. But a lot of times it's like, okay, we are looking at vendor 1. Everybody quickly look at your notes. We're going to go around the room and we are going to vote. And in this case, we're going to do confidence level ratings, of which there are only 3. We'll cover confidence level ratings in just a second, but go ahead and enact those next 2 or 3 animations, Jonathan. All right. So I go around the room and I say 1, 2, 3. Everybody give me your thumbs up, sideways, or down, and how you thought about this vendor. So in this scenario, it's thumbs up. Do the rest of I think it's 3 more animations.
Oh, did it not go?
No, you did the names, and now it's just a few more.
Oh, I got you. All right.
So in this case, we have thumbs up, and thumbs up, right? So we're all in agreement. Now that we have our rating, we can go ahead and start documenting our evaluation. Now, If we didn't have a consensus and somebody was like, hey, I got some confidence, or they didn't agree with the same rating, then we want to have a deliberation around, hey, what's standing us apart? Do we have to, is someone going to have to come up or down? We'll have that discussion as a team. And this was a principle back in 2017 where a senior GAO attorney said, well, hey, why don't you guys just kind of work this approach backwards, right? Use this approach backwards. And so we did, and that meant give the rating first and then document the rest of the findings. So real quick, this in no way changes your documentation style where you're not creating a full evaluation report, capturing the positives and negatives in great detail. If you have the slides, you can fast forward ahead to one of the other slides where it shares what a sample report might look like. So there are positives and negatives for each factor. They're documented with words to prove that merit and that rationale, right? So there's a lot of really good resources. And this works with any part of the FAR, 16.5, 8.4, 13, 15. You can include it in any way, shape, or form. It's really easy after an oral presentation. It's done, and you all sit there and just do the immediate on-the-spot consensus evaluation.
Trevor,
This approach,
Ben has a question, says, the method that we're talking about on the spot, concerned that it may not be possible for evaluations that are required to provide specific materials, aka past performance, experience, etc., say a solicitation for a construction project.
Yeah, well, one, it works excellent for experience. It works good for past performance, although I'm a big advocate of focusing on experience and not necessarily on past performance to make my decision on a contract. But for a construction project, if you have certain materials that you have to review, either in phase 1 or phase 2, the type of evaluation on the spot or individuals, none of them require individual reports or meetings before just doing straight in consensus as a discussion, or in some as a peer review. And so there's no limitation on those aspects.
Thanks for that. And Kevin asks, during this process, can you contact the vendor for clarification if the members of the team have questions or concerns?
Well, once the solicitation's been released and you're getting into, just like any normal process that you have, of course, if you want to go into exchanges or clarifications, or if the team has to do discussions, that is an authority the team still has, right? They have no less tools than they originally would have. They have more. And I'll answer Sylvia's with a quick story. It's a really cool story. If you go into resources and you look at FEMA COVID-19, that is an excellent webinar to watch, talking about on-the-spot consensus. And Sylvia's question is, wouldn't this approach be best if you have a limited number of proposals? Actually, this approach is the more you have, the more effect this is going to have for you. With this COVID-19, it was a $3.2 billion, 2 single award IDIQs for COVID-19, vaccination support services a few years ago, obviously. And they got 52 or 54 proposals in phase 1. In phase 1, they just had the PDF on experience that we talked about, targeted experience, and they were able to get through all of those quickly. They did them all as on-the-spot consensus. And I think it's like minute 45 or 46 in that webinar. They really dive into the boost that was provided by this technique for that team. So without on-the-spot consensus, doing it the traditional way would have taken them months and months and months to go through those initial phase 1 volumes. And then they got into phase 2, they had oral presentations. I think they had 11 or 12 of those, and they mimicked the process from phase 1 to do on-the-spot consensus immediately after each. Right? And that's the benefit of having, we had some questions earlier. If you have the slides, you can click on the spot consensus report sample. There's a sample evaluation report that's been through the ringer, that's been through many different GAO bid protests, and it's been battle tested. You have the general technique itself as a discussion point. I think there's a short video explaining what it is, and then a couple different samples, right? So that's the benefit of this, is we have concrete samples for each of you as listed in the resource pods.
And just to answer a couple questions real quick, Yes, the team is still going to have discussions. So team members are still going to have conversations back and forth if there are differing opinions. The goal is to get the team to a consensus decision, just as you would as if you'd done individual ratings. You still want to have that consensus memo prepared by the chair. So yes, there will still be a final decision consensus memo prepared by the chair. But instead of it being based on individual rating documents being rolled up into the master, it will be one decision made. Somebody else is talking about the idea of looking at each proposal independently of the other proposals. And yes, that's all we're talking about right here is each proposal is still evaluated independently from all the others according to sections L and M, and you're rating them and coming up with the evaluation. We're not going to talk about the innovation today called comparative evaluation. That there's too much to that to get into in our webinar today. But if you're interested in talking more about comparing offers to offers, you can check out some resources at fai.gov/periodic-table on comparative evaluation. Really cool stuff there. But
that's right. And in no way does using this approach or tactic compare or commingle any of the responses, right? So I'm not sure where that came through, and if it did, I'll do a better job of speaking when I get to some of the other principles.
Yeah, and to Anonymous, who says this seems like too much of a shortcut to cut to the chase. Yes and no. I mean, the part of this innovation is to cut to the chase. It is to streamline the process. But the no part is, no, we're not trying to cut out the necessary discussion, right? The team still needs to have the appropriate level of discussion around the value of the or the merits of the proposal. It just cuts out the time it takes each individual evaluation member to write up their own evaluation, score it, bring all the scores to the table, report them out, navigate, discuss each and every one. It's just being done as a team. So it does shortcut it, but it's not shortcutting it in a way that loses out on the important value of the process.
That's a really good framing of what that means as far as a shortcut. And what we actually found of doing kind of a statistical analysis of different teams is when we would create those individual evaluator reports, what would happen is they would just copy and paste individual statements into their consensus report without really making sure that that's what the whole team felt in consensus. And then you would have a kind of sloppy record defending the decisions that were made. And I've always been a big fan of like blank slate, right? Where I have a consensus with this vendor, blank slate, let's get it done. What language do you include in section M, which requires the government to document how proposals will be evaluated? Sections L and M aren't changing from what you would usually do, right? Because in section M, you don't say, hey, we're going to take all these, we're going to take 3 months to do individual evaluator reports. Then we're going to get together and we're going to go ahead and do a consensus. Then we're going to have, so this part of the back end part of the process of that's really not included in the solicitation anyway. And your section M is going to remain unchanged from what you had if you are using this approach or not using this approach. You'll still have your adjectival ratings, whatever form they are. You'll still have what factors you're evaluating compared with your instructions to offers, just the same as you always would.
Man, these are fantastic questions that you all are bringing forth. And I'm so grateful for this because this is exactly what Trevor and I were hoping for, is that you would push back and challenge us with your questions and concerns about these. We're going to move forward. We can always circle back to
one more answer that I had primed up ready to go.
Yeah.
Will the group need to have the same level of experience, or should there be a leader? That's a really good question. My experience is it does not need to be the same level of experience, but if you're going to do this, you need to have prepped as a team what you are going to do, how you are going to do it, and what style the team is going to use moving forward. Now, what really helps is having a coach who has done this before or somebody who has experience helping lead through those. And Penny asks, what is your opinion about the possibility of on-the-spot consensus causing a feeling of pressure for team members who may not work well with this approach? That is also a really good question. And so another benefit of having a facilitator, for instance, I was just working with a team. There was an evaluator. The evaluator's boss was also part of the team. There was an intern that was also one of the evaluation team members. So you talk about varying levels of experience. There was an intern who was a retired military, but still an intern, a senior procurement person, and then like the division director of that procurement, and all varying degrees of experience. But we went through the process, we trained together, we knew what we were looking for, and they brought various different perspectives in. But as a facilitator for that team, I was pulling out those comments they were trying to have. I was trying to, there was no diffusion necessary for this team, but sometimes there is. And you got to make sure the soft-spoken folks get a chance to talk first. So you kind of rotate in that, in that conversation of, okay, next question that we had in the solicitation, let's have Jonathan go first, right? And give me a positive, only one positive, and not, don't give me a negative yet. So you can transfer how that goes around when you're documenting this, but this is just for the on-the-spot consensus portion of it. A lot of this spills over into confidence level ratings and documentation itself, which I think we can move on just for the sake of time. I think we've definitely tried to answer as many of these as we could. Okay. Jonathan, have you used these before, confidence ratings?
We have begun to use these more recently, and I'll tell you my experience. So I've been on a lot of technical evaluation boards before, and when I'm reviewing technical proposals and I have adjectival ratings from exceptional down to unacceptable, I'll go through and I'm gonna ignore on the spot consensus for a moment and go back to how it was done back in the day. I would go through, I would review a proposal, and I'd see this great proposal and I'd be marking it exceptional here and good there, exceptional there. And just, I was like, wow, this is great. This is what I was hoping for. Then I go to read the next proposal, and I'm still using these adjectival ratings, and I'm reviewing it. And this one just doesn't feel as good, but based on the definitions of the adjectival ratings of at least one significant strength and no weaknesses or deficiencies, this other offer is also being ranked as exceptional and good. But there's just something about it that doesn't make me confident, right? So what ends up happening, and I'm going to admit this, and I know I'm being recorded, but there have been times where I will go, I want to change my rating on that last one that I just evaluated and bump the scores up, because I think relative, I have more confidence in this one, and I want to make sure that the scores reflect that. And that's not the right way to do things, but it boils down to not having the right tool to effectively evaluate, which is where I think this technique is fantastic. So Trevor, what is this technique? How is it used? Does it completely get rid of adjectival ratings or something else?
Yeah, so really, it is just another form of adjectival ratings, right? The good book of the FAR does not tell us what rating scheme we need to use. It tells us we can use any rating methodology or combinations of rating methodology to do our work, right? So this process of the colors, the exceptional, the building of significant strengths and weaknesses were all culturally built over a long period of time at many different agencies, but none of them are required. Now, the caveat is, if you're doing FAR Part 15 source selections and you're in the DoD and it's over a certain dollar threshold, you got to follow what's in the source selection guide for the DoD, right? But that's not where I think most of us are. However, we've worked with several DoD cells over the years who have done confidence ratings, just not under a Part 15, right? So they are just another form of adjectival rating. Just as you would have to document and back up your rating for any of your consensus evaluation reports, you would have to do the same thing here. So when you have a confidence rating, like you can see in the top right-hand corner, here's a sample from a $370 million Agile IT task order. And this was on an oral presentation. And this was the government has some confidence that they understand the requirement, proposes a sound approach and will be successful in performing the work. And this team just used a stream of bullets, some good, some not good, right? Some that increase their confidence, some that decrease their confidence.
You're saying that this screen grab here in the upper right-hand corner is from an actual source selection evaluation.
That's right.
And this was what they wrote. This was their documentation documenting the some confidence.
Well, I only grabbed the 3 bullets for sake of space, but there are probably 7 or 8 bullets in total.
Okay.
So when we're talking about confidence ratings, we're usually talking about coupling that with streamlined bulleted statements to defend the rating of the rationale. So this single stream of bullets isn't the most popular approach. The most popular approach, which I think you can find in some of the resources, is one column that says for this factor, what increases our confidence, and for this factor, what decreases our confidence.
Okay.
Right. And so this is applicable in every part of the FAR, including 15.3 source selections. Because can anybody out there in the chat world tell us what you have to document in 15.3? Do you have to document strengths and weaknesses in your evaluation report? Let us know in the chat. Let's see how many people respond.
All right, 15.3. Is there something you have to document? What does 15.3 say? All right, so Anonymous asks, does one have to justify their confidence rating? Yes. So in some form or fashion, you need to have some rationale, right? So when we talked earlier about managing risk, especially as we start thinking about managing protest risk, what is the government best defense against protest? Our best defense against protest is appropriate levels of documentation, that we followed the process we said we were going to do, right? So if we are following the process we said we were going to do, that's enough documentation to put us on the right path.
And that's about one of the most important things that we could foot stomp is most of the time, if you followed what you said you were going to do in your solicitation, you've got a lot of wiggle room as a government evaluator or member of a procurement team to stick with what you had, right? To not go to corrective actions, just to follow, to follow that methodology through. But there's some good answers here. Strengths, weaknesses. Ashley said relevant strengths. That's right. Relevant strengths and weaknesses. Relevant is the key word. You don't have to label them as such. So this same approach of bulleted statements supporting good things, like, look at this first bullet. While some push for reducing documentation, there was a focus on documentation for government and overemphasis of doing it. Well, that's not a good thing. Understanding flexibility in teams, portfolio management, a positive. Well, that's obviously something that went to their favor. But it's just one of those where we're in such a cultural norm of 15.3, got to identify all my strengths, significant strengths, weaknesses. For somebody who is doing this for the first time, this is a really hard to do evaluation factor for the first time. But once procurement teams go through it, I have not had a program office yet that has said, hey, we want to revert to doing the old style of adjectival ratings. There was a comment that told us we were pronouncing it wrong. It's adjectival, Jonathan. I don't know if you saw that comment come in. So let's make sure that we're pronouncing it correctly, adjectival. So that's really what it boils down to. Now, what we did with that historically is if you look under the resources, there is a really, really good webinar. It's an hour long in total. It's called All About Confidence Ratings. If you're looking to do this for the first time, it's a 1-hour YouTube webinar. It goes into every single facet you can think of with confidence ratings. The protest, the relative strengths, FAR Part 15, and it even includes a 15-minute mock evaluation and mock bulleted style of documentation with a live audience. Right? It's a really cool resource if you're looking to do this for the first time. Kevin said, would you agree that using this approach could be easily manipulated by 1 or 2 people of the team and no one's showing something different, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. So I would say part of that goes to who is on your team, right? And does anybody volunteer to be on, evaluation teams? No, right? However, if you can make them truncated, right? If you can make them streamlined and it's not that much of a burden, you might have some of the better members that represent the work come do it. I'll give you an example. A team that I'm working with, we had those phase 1 volumes come in, right? Had phase 2 volumes come in, and then we had our phase 2 evaluations after the oral briefings. And from the training that was phase 1, it was about an hour. Then we had 2 hours, right? We had 2 hours of phase 1 evaluations. Then we were done with those. Then we had an hour of training before phase 2. And then we had 3 1-hour oral briefings for the 3 vendors that were in phase 2. And it took about an hour total to do the documentation of those. So the entire procurement, phase 1 and phase 2, for about 10 vendors was less than 8 hours total time spent by the evaluation team members. Right. So it can be a really powerful model as well. Terrence asks, can we provide a link? We certainly will. They're in the slides. We'll definitely give you the link to it. Last one, D'Amica asks, we have to ensure the proposal is evaluated solely on the factors. That's right. They are solely against the factors that are identified in the solicitation.
Anonymous, not only do contracting officers agree that this is a defensible approach, but there is plenty of case law to support it as well. It's been used in procurements across the board. It is absolutely defensible. It's a great technique. Can help streamline the process. And honestly, I would say for me, it actually helps teams to provide a more thoughtful justification for the rating, right? And so it allows me to really identify, hey, what are all the things that make me confident about this? What are some of the things that give me pause, question, I'm uncertain about it? What are some of the things that are red flags, right? And I can combine all of those things together to make my decision, as opposed to the more what I would consider to be limiting terms of adjectival ratings, as seen here on this screen that's X'd out. So, I can see a proposal that contains no significant weaknesses, or any weaknesses can be readily corrected. But what does that mean? How do I really rationalize that? How do I rationalize when I start to get into saying, hey, all of these things make me confident. Some of these things don't. Some of these things kind of scare me a little bit. Therefore, my rating is, my confidence in this is. So I think that this is a great technique. Trevor, what do folks need to do if they want to use this? Does this need to be incorporated into the solicitation?
And so someone asked, how is thoughtfulness conveyed in a few bullets rather than long, drawn-out paragraphs? Well, a few bullets is sometimes all you need when it comes to the rating of a factor and how the government felt about that company. Like the long, drawn-out paragraphs are the documentation where we wrap ourselves up and we end up getting in trouble with kind of the misspeak. Maybe we introduce something here. It's easier to go through the review process with streamlined bullets because we cut out the fat, we get to the rating, we get to the decision, and then when it goes through the review chain, there's less that we have to take and tweak. And that's how procurements, like some of the ones we're referencing, can go through 20 proposals in less than 60 days and to make an award for a 15.3 procurement. And it's not that it's rushed in any way. It's actually more thorough because you're focusing on the important areas of the requirement. And I think so far it's like 100% of those procurement teams have used these approaches, of which is well over 100 at this point throughout the federal government. It's a year later when they're interviewed, the vendor and the program office, about like, hey, was this the right evaluation approach to identify this vendor? And it's been 100% so far. Yes, right. We had the right approach. The vendors feel very comfortable coming in and supporting where they are, and they've all been happy with that support. So it's a really cool metric to be able to offer up. I know we got to move because we have more things to cover, but there was one that says, I hope this is a screen grab from a summary of some sort. Well, there's a few more bullets behind it, but that was the entire documentation for that factor for like a $370 million task order. And what the CEO did here was he gave them the entire report as part of the debriefing. So here you go. Here's the report. He also let them have a live telephone debriefing in addition to the written documentation. So he had nothing to hide. And then it was protested by 3 different vendors in phase 2, and all 3 were denied. And they protested the exact form of these bullets were too vague, impressionistic, and the GAO had no time. They were substantive. They were tied back directly to the evaluation criteria, and they were meaningful. So if we can do all of that and save in time and money and our effort, let's consider it. I know we got to move forward, Jonathan.
Yeah, and I'll move forward, and I'll just say this last point because some people get really scared about bullets. If you haven't been convinced yet, go read some literature on plain language or take a plain language writing course. Long drawn out paragraphs with sentence after sentence and run-on sentence, and every single thing you can cram into a paragraph does us no favors. Be succinct, be authentic, be real, tie it back to the solicitation and what you said you're going to do, and you're going to be fine. All right, let's keep going. This is great. Let's talk about oral presentations and wait, before so, coming back here, Trevor, do they need to do anything? This needs to be in the solicitation?
100%. Well, actually, no, it doesn't need to. I think it's 15.308 in the FAR says you don't even need to put your rating scheme, adjectival ratings, in the solicitation at all. It's not even a requirement in the FAR. However, being a good, transparent government official, I recommend when teams are trying this for the first time, put it in the solicitation, write it up so folks can see how they're going to be evaluated. There are really good samples. In the bottom left, there is a sample from a DHS sample solicitation. Use that language on how they build out confidence ratings.
Yeah. So the short answer is, if thinking about fourth quarter, if you haven't already issued your solicitation, if you haven't issued your task order yet, if you're getting ready to, and you want to use this, if you're not already planning on talking about your methodology in your solicitation, don't worry about it, and you can use this. If you are talking about it, then you would need to change the language to ensure that you can do it. And as Trevor said, if you're trying this out for the first time, not a bad idea to put the language in there because you're being fully transparent with industry. All right, oral presentations.
This is a good one. I'll share a story from something I heard this morning. All right, I went on LinkedIn and I saw a colleague post an article from the head of Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Army Contracting Command. They do a lot of procurements over there, trust me. That was the contracting office I first had when I worked in industry. And their executive director said, we're just so sick of these hundreds of pages of written material. They don't give us anything. A lot of times they're wrong or it's jibber jabber. Is there why don't we just do more oral presentations and get right to the substantive part of our requirement? And so this was just last week. And, it's an entire big faction of the DoD who is now thinking, let's get rid of our long narrative proposals that we get that takes 3 months to read through, document. I mean, if you have a 150-page proposal, is your evaluation report going to be short and succinct? It is not, right? And so this is to bring in the actual technical staff, hear their proposed solutions, make this as targeted as is possible, right? So this is one that's spread really far throughout the government. There is a sample schedule in the right-hand corner about how you can infuse questions in the solicitation, give them questions right when they arrive, or even have a two-way interactive dialogue between the vendor and the technical staff. Because that's the truest way for us to understand that they actually know the work and they can perform it. I've led many teams through this style and approach. And I've actually had many teams invite their contracting officers from other divisions to just be a fly on the wall. And even when they do that, somebody who doesn't understand the mission space, they don't know the history, almost every time the people in the room who are bystanders identify which team knows the work the most based on how they respond to the questions, how they package that together, and just how they speak about it. So
are you saying that they're able to identify their level of confidence?
That's right. Even their level of confidence. And a lot of times, like, confidence level ratings are so organic in themselves, right? And it ties itself kind of to a subjective feeling. And subjectivity is okay. Subjectivity is great. It's hard to combat our inherent subjectivity we have within the FAR and with being contracting officers. It's really hard to do that. So confidence level ratings just are a little bit more subjective than you would think the traditional adjectival ratings are. So yes, we're capturing not just a rating, but aside from a rating, they just know, like, it's that company. That's the company that's the best. It's clear, because I would recommend typically doing an oral presentation, maybe in the second phase of a two-phase approach, because you don't want to have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 oral presentations. I really recommend trying to pare down, if you're doing a big competition, paring that down through an initial phase. And we'll have a sample here in a couple slides of what that would look like. But maybe in the second phase, ask them questions, have a two-way dialogue. The FAR specifically calls out the allowance of an interactive dialogue between the parties, government and industry. Don't be afraid to have that dialogue. That dialogue is really where you can separate the pretenders from the contenders on who's going to do the work.
And I would say, with this technique, try not to get into the monotonous rut of having the vendor come in and do a dry presentation followed up by the government asking a preset list of standardized questions and then moving on. The idea is, yes, you want the vendor to come in prepared to share something, to, prepare their response to a scenario and how they would handle it. Or if it's an IT thing, maybe they're going to come in and actually demonstrate some programming. They're going to code right there in front of the team. But also have a twist, have something planned in the presentation process that throws them a curveball that they didn't have time to prepare for, because that will tell you a lot about their ability to pivot. Because guess what, folks, over the life of a 5-year contract, there's going to be curveballs and they're going to be your team member. So how are they going to respond to that unexpected change? And that's also going to tell you whether they have the real experts in the room, or if they just brought you their demo team, right? Because if they just brought you a prepped demo team that can only speak to what they were prepped on, when you throw them that curveball, they're not going to be ready for it. So oral presentations are great. Trevor, Penny wants to know, is there a written proposal that accompanies the oral presentation?
No. The concept of oral presentations is to replace and not to duplicate. So if you absolutely need something that is in writing, then you should get it in writing. Anything else that you don't absolutely need is an opportunity to have an oral presentation. Maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's a video meeting, maybe you're in person. But an oral presentation can eliminate all of what is not needed in a typical written volume, and you can get that information directly from them. As Jonathan mentioned, the most important thing I think you can do is to ask them those challenge questions, those immediate questions when they come in. Maybe they walk in and it's like, hey, I know you're prepared, but here's 2 more questions for you to consider, and you got 30 minutes to prepare. Mm-hmm. That's where you really start to see which teams get it and which teams don't. And that's the exact process I used with the team a couple of weeks ago. We had 3 questions in the solicitation, 2 questions we gave them right when they showed up, gave them 30 minutes. Well, the one team who ended up winning had a really good response. The other 2 really, really, really poor responses. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for ways to make our job easier in the selection process. And oral presentations are, the exact thing that it can do.
So Trevor, I want you to mitigate the risk that I created with my last statement. How do you ensure equity across vendors if you don't ask the same questions to each? Wouldn't this expose the government to the risk of protest?
So our litany of bid protest decisions so far would be no. So that wouldn't be. However, if there are questions in the solicitation, those are all going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
If you're giving them questions and they show up, those should all be the same as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you're giving them a challenge question or scenario prompt in the middle of a presentation, you should probably keep those the same. You don't have to, but when you get into that portion 5 in the sample schedule here, where it says we will participate in an interactive dialogue, the courts and GAO have long determined that those are not going to be the same questions because they are all tying back to their unique presentation that was just delivered to you, right? So those are going to be different questions, and that is okay because they're different solutions. So you can't have the same questions against different solutions.
Ben says, I hope you're not suggesting substituting an oral presentation for written material. It is impossible for a panel member to remember everything the vendor says. More importantly, unless the presentations are recorded, the answers are not on the record, giving the vendor the ability to provide info that may or may not be accurate, especially an unscrupulous vendor. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are, that's been done hundreds of times so far in the federal government space. It's not our responsibility to remember everything a vendor says, right? So a really popular line that stands out from a lot of bid protest decisions is it's the vendor's job to convince us in detail that they can do the work. It's not our job to try to remember everything they say and tie it all over the place on how they deliver us their oral solution. You can certainly video record or audio record every meeting if you'd like to. That's fine, right? Everybody has that option. I would say most of the teams that I've worked with choose not to video or audio record. The FAR gives us the matter of record that we choose. It can be written notes. It can be an evaluation report. You can have a stenographer even in the FAR, right? Yeah, stenographer. I think I've had one team actually use a stenographer. It was a long time ago. But what we're seeing is when you take your notes during an oral presentation and you have the on-the-spot consensus, it's all fresh, it's done, and you're capturing what they said increase your confidence and decrease your confidence. You're not capturing everything, right? If they just had an adequate response to something you asked about, we're not capturing that kind of material because it's not germane to our evaluation. We're trying to see what they did really well or maybe not, but that's why that there is a litany of bid protest decisions that support the methodology and how it's been done before. And maybe in these resources, I think if you look at the FEMA COVID-19 or the FEMA doctrine, 2 really strong samples where you can watch and hear how a team did it and some of the hurdles that they were able to overcome together.
Absolutely. And overton.spence@gsa.gov. So typically oral presentations are not used as the only source selection tool. They're generally used as part of a phased approach. Maybe there's some circumstances where for smaller, less complex procurements, you could get away with an oral presentation with subsequently submitted written proposal with the price proposal in it. But generally, they're part of a phased approach. And again, when we talk about questions, as Trevor said, questions need to be the same to all vendors in the solicitation. If you're going to give them on-the-spot questions as they come in for their oral presentation, those questions need to be the same. And if you're giving them a scenario or a twist during that presentation, that should also be the same. Where we talk about asking them different questions is about getting into what they are proposing. So say they propose to use this process and this approach, and you might ask them, why does your company use that approach versus another one? Or you responded in this way. Can you help us understand how you would support that with your staffing model or with your labor mix, right? So you can ask them questions about their specific presentation, and as Trevor said, part of that interactive dialogue it's really about you trying to familiarize yourself with the vendor and get to a degree of confidence. So great technique. If you're going to use this, Trevor, does this need to be in the solicitation?
Yes, it's helpful to spell out the entire model of what you're going to do in the solicitation. But if you are, if you're going to have challenge questions that go with the oral presentation, you don't need those in the solicitation, obviously. You can have those ready to go the day of each oral presentation as well. So it's something, but this can have so much impact in saving of time, but really it's so much easier to identify who is the right vendor. And if you're out there and you have a solicitation that's out and you're getting ready to conduct some oral presentations, well, you don't need to have all of those questions done before the first. You only need to have them done when the first oral presentation comes if you're going to do any challenge or scenario questions. So if you haven't done that already, you still have time, right? And I have some sample questions in just a little bit, but this is a really powerful technique. We have one more question. The time saved, is profound. It does reduce, the workload. It's a lot easier to document after the fact. You kind of have your record. I've had teams do a two-phase approach where phase one on experience wasn't a PDF. It was like a 15-minute phone conversation. And then they documented their findings. And then phase two was just an oral presentation. And that was for like a $300 million BPA. And their record, their bulleted report, kind of like we saw a few slides ago, went all the way up to the Court of Federal Claims. And they said it is certainly meaningful and adequate. They even had a bullet. This was for an 8.4, so it was a BPA. They even had one bullet on the question of staffing in factor one for the phone interview that said sound staffing approach. 3 words. And they said that's not enough. And the Court of Federal Claims said, yeah, it's meaningful. It's tied back to the evaluation factor. Adequacy doesn't have to be just quantity. The definition is quantity and quality, right? So we can say more. Sometimes it's less, right? Less is more. There you go.
So anonymous about time investment as well. I'll also say this. So having a multi-phased approach sometimes might seem like it would add more steps to the process. Generally speaking, if you're not using some of these techniques, oral presentations being one of them, you end up having to ask for a lot more details to be written down. And because you're trying to manage risk, you're going to ask them for all sorts of details and give them more space and more pages, and that's just more reading. So the oral presentation process allows you to see things in real time, get a real sense for who these people are that are proposing to work with you. It's just a really great technique. All right, folks, we've got a couple more slides to go through here real quick, and then we'll be wrapping it up. So select best suited, then negotiate. What does that mean, Trevor? What are we talking about?
This is a toughie, right? This is one of the, you can go to the next slide, Jonathan. This is one of the more advanced techniques, right? Not applicable for 15.3 procurements. If you see that yellow text in the right-hand corner, if you have this in your solicitation at the end of the year, great. If you don't, I would recommend putting this entire text of 633 and 634 in your next solicitation for an 8.413 or 16.505 procurement. It's like a spare tire. You never know if you're going to have it. If you're going to need it, but you want it in your car. It can be so impactful. The government teams that I've worked with that have used this have had success every single time. A lot of times they just ask for, an updated price, right? Like, hey, give me a better price. But sometimes you see those highlights, they can be any remaining issues. They can be anything technical that you want updated. Because when you're not in 15.3, we are not following the 15.306 rules on discussions and clarifications. Those aren't principles found in these other 3 FAR sections. but we have to be fair and we have to be equitable. So when we put this language on our solicitation, we can say, all right, I've identified this company as the best suited. I want to go ahead and make some updates, have some exchanges with them before I give them the finalized award. Because if we only ask for updates at the kickoff meeting, let us know in the chat pod, what happens if we want to make updates to technical and price, but then we wait until the kickoff and then we ask the vendor, hey, can you do this? Can you do this for us, right? Can you bump your SLA from 98 to 99%? Let us know what's going to happen to us in the government. Are the vendors going to say, sure, no problem. We're happy to do that for you.
I think what they'll say, Trevor, is more money, please.
Yeah, like Rod Tidwell and Jerry Maguire, show me the quant.
Uh-huh.
I need to see the money if I'm going to do anything for you because I have a signed contract.
That's right.
So the concept here, which was not text that was independently created, it was working with a government, contract assistance organization. They said, hey, we developed some language. You guys want to try it? Sure, we're here to try anything. So we tried it, and now we have 4 or 5 different really good GAO bid protest decisions, and they really help define where the bounds are with techniques like this, right? So all your evaluations are done, all of your documentation is done. I am ready to make an award to Jonathan Evans LLC, but before I give it to him, I'm going to say, hey, Jonathan. And Jonathan doesn't know if I'm doing clarifications, discussions, negotiations, evaluations. He doesn't know where he stands. I'm just asking him, I need you to update your SLA and I want a better price. Historically, Jonathan, what are you going to say now? You don't have an award. You don't know where you stand.
Well, I'm going to make an assumption that it would be in my best interest to try and make some adjustments because that might edge out my competition and help me win. I don't know that I've already been identified as the best suited. So sure, Trevor, I'll lower my price a little bit. I can't really make too much of a concession on the SLA though, because that's about as good as we can get. So I can give you a lower price.
And that's better for us than not doing anything. Now, if I got information that says, well, my priorities have changed, I can then go out to everybody. I can update my solicitation. I can have more exchanges. I have more tools in the toolbox on the government side to go ahead and move forward. However, typically it's just been, oh, great, we got an update. We got a price update. We got something technical done. Let's now go ahead and make an award. So there are really good resources down here for a GAO decision, sample solicitation language that you would want to have, specifics on the technique, and even sample documentation from a team that used this before, right? It's redacted. It shows you how it's been done.
So Demikia, again, if you do what you say you are going to do, even if there is a protest, the protest is not going to be sustained. If you say you're going to use this technique, you use the language that's been included here, somebody might go, hey, this seems fishy to me. I'm going to protest. We did exactly what we said we were going to do. We selected a best suited, and then we negotiated some additional technical and price things. And based on those negotiations, we either went with them or we went back out, modified the solicitation. We have the ability to do it because we wrote down that is what we were going to do. So it's really important. Real quick,
really, we haven't had anybody protest it at the solicitation phase. So it's then inherently baked in. And the good discussion we've had on this before from other senior GAO minds is for these solicitations, we're not talking about 15.3. We're in charge of writing how we're going to go about it. And as long as we've captured this up front, we are pretty much golden, right? So let's be savvy, let's be creative, and let's get where we need to be. So if you do have this in your solicitation, use it, right? So don't be afraid to have those exchanges. They can be really informal. You just want to document them on the backside. We do have a few questions though. Is the select best suited to negotiate close related to the two-step down select? Kind of, I would say you would really only use this in the second phase of a two-phase down select, but you could use this in a single phase, no matter what. But it's easier when you only have a few companies left to look at. So just use it where we have any of these FAR sections, 8.413 or 16.505. Kevin asked, can the government, holding or having vendors for on-site be held liable for expenses? No, right? Those are just typically a cost of bid and proposal, which we always say, hey, we're not liable for any bid and proposal costs. So if the government does have an on-site visit, then they can go ahead and do that. And vendors, that's just part of their cost, right? Which they're saving in other bid and proposal cost areas. And even in interviewing some of these companies, large and small, sometimes it's a little bit more expensive for them to thoughtfully prepare for an oral presentation. However, that's an expense they will gladly pay for. They want to come convince us they can do the work virtually or in person rather than writing a long proposal about it. And so these are all things from industry where they're clamoring to do more of, not less of. Oof.
And I would just encourage you on that note to really take into consideration before you require an on-site oral presentation to do an analysis of the value, right? Because it really depends on what you're going to have them do during the oral presentation. We've had great success doing virtual oral presentations. And if you can use that, there are some types of oral presentations like a technical demo where you're going to have developers actually writing code and demonstrating software. Even then, we've had some success doing that virtually, but I think most teams prefer to see that process play out in person. So just have a good business discussion about the value of on-site, because it does cost vendors. And anytime you are increasing the cost to the vendors, you're putting a burden on them, particularly our small businesses and our socioeconomically disadvantaged businesses. So just be mindful of what that does to the competition process. Trevor,
Gotcha.
you want to tackle Anonymous's second question here? You want to?
Yes.
Okay.
Anonymous said, I love innovation and I'm an ardent fan of streamlining, but I believe too much streamlining invites a lot of work for contracting officers and general counsel. When it comes to risk, not only must we ask what the likelihood is, we also have to ask what the impact of a realized risk is. Can you discuss this? Yes, 100%. There are some teams doing things for the first time where they just throw everything together without really thinking through what's applicable to them. There are some of the more advanced techniques where they just might not be ready. Like there's one called a betterment factor that's up on the periodic table. And I've had teams that, think about using a betterment factor, and then it's really ends up being not that applicable to what they were doing. And it would be a little bit of a clunky factor for them to include. So it is very important to talk through, are we using this for the right reasons, right? Are we we don't want to innovate for the sake of innovating. We want to make sure that we're getting realized risks reduced, mitigated, or overcome by increasing our benefits.
All right, we need to get through a couple more slides here, but again, a lot of this material, there's reference links in here, and if you have follow-up questions, we can certainly get to them if you email us. So let's talk about schedule real quick here, Trevor.
Yeah, this is one of those now that we've gone away from some of the traditional techniques, and I really wanted to cover this in a way. Even if you haven't released your solicitation for a year-end requirement right now, there's still time. And this schedule shows you how that can be possible. Maybe you're releasing your draft today. It shows you when the questions are due, when the final is going to be released. Someone says, when is this webinar scheduled to end? The registration had it from 1 to 2:30, and I think there might have been confusion on having two. If you need to drop off, please do. I think, Jonathan, you said the recording will be available, and so are the slides. So please don't miss lunch or anything for us. We're just up here blazing away in our blazers talking about procurement and innovation. So we're going to go until 2:30. So so feel free to drop off if you need to, and we'll catch back up. But the last thing about schedule is I'm a huge fan of putting a schedule in the solicitation for vendors to see exactly like what you see on the right-hand side of the screen. Here's the event. Here's the date. Now, we say these are target dates. We're going to try to meet them. But if that changes, we'll let you know. But it's really helpful for us not to go into the black hole of communication. And it's like 2 weeks go by. Well, hey, where is this thing? At least they know what we're trying to do. If this shifts, let's let them know. But it's kind of just a quick and dirty on schedule. It's possible, right? Even this late in the game, put it in your solicitation and try to stick with it. And there's some good resources down there to look at as well. Let's go to the next one. Jonathan, I think you got to give them 1.5 CLPs if they stayed on the whole time at this point. So that might be.
I think so. We'll make it worth your time. If you haven't already found value in this, you know, half a CLP, man, I don't know if that's gonna make the difference. But this has been so great so far. Let's talk. This is for folks who may be in the process of finalizing stuff for fourth quarter. You're trying to think about your evaluation factors. You're getting ready to issue a task order. You're getting ready to put a BPA call out. You're whatever you might be doing. If you have the ability right now to think about a different approach to evaluations, and for those of you who it's too late in the game, please take this under advisement for all future procurements. Trevor, traditional versus efficient evaluation approach.
That's right. Didn't even call it innovative, but what you see in the efficient evaluation approach is one that has become very popular in teams who are looking to deal with, 10 plus proposals in phase one, and they're looking to do only 2 or 3 in phase two. So this is just highlighting some of those differences. I recommend a 2-phase approach in everything that we do. There's no risk in doing a 2-phase approach. It just prepares you if you have more than a handful of vendors. If you need written responses, consider short, succinct written responses. Eliminate the fluff. Do them by phone. Do an oral briefing in phase one. Those are options that we all have. Traditional approach, some of that color rating, that acceptable, outstanding, very good. I prefer the confidence level ratings. Watch that webinar that we linked to. That could be a very powerful learning tool. Traditional approach, individual evaluations and reports. They add a lot of time, and sometimes they can make it more complex, right? They don't typically decrease your risk. A lot of times they can increase it. Now, it might be the right approach for certain procurements, but I've found that you can do the on-the-spot consensus in almost everything that we do. If you're going to do phase one experience, such a big fan of targeted and demonstrated experience using questions or specific scenarios that outline the hard parts of the requirement, not the easy stuff. We want to look if they can do the hard parts. Well, we don't need to look at everything. We only need to look at what's important. If you have a 50-page requirements document, you can have 3 questions that point to the challenging areas of that, and you want to see their experience doing those specific things. You don't have to boil the ocean. You can just have a light lift in that initial phase. We talked about documenting long essay-style narrative paragraphs versus short bulleted statements. Let's get to a decision point. Let's make it. Let's defend it. Now, Jonathan, you've coached a lot of teams coming through CSAWs. A lot of times, have you seen this approach of tech approach, management approach, past performance and price?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, this is so the default that everybody's using is, what are we going to evaluate? Technical approach, management approach, past performance and price. It's like you could write a poem about it. It's what everybody does. But when I work with teams, as I coach teams around what is really important to you, a lot of folks are in their requirements section. They have all of these constraints built in because they're trying to mitigate a fear that they won't have a solid trust, a solid working relationship with the vendor. And so what I tell folks is call out some of the scary bits. What are the parts that are critical that can't afford to fail? Don't bury that in some nebulous technical approach. Call out and say, you're going to be evaluated on how you will address this particular risk. Or, you know, and past performance, I think Trevor and I have talked about this before. Past performance has a certain degree of value, but it may not have the same value as corporate experience. So past performance is if a vendor has it, how other people have rated their performance in previous experiences. Corporate experience is what the company is bringing to the table and what they're able to provide. A lot of small businesses, even small businesses who are doing work for the government, are not getting CPARS evaluations because the procurements that they've been doing are underneath the simplified acquisition threshold. And there is no requirement for the government to provide CPARS, past performance ratings, to businesses when we do a procurement underneath the simplified acquisition threshold. Now, shame on us, even if you have a requirement under the SAT, I still challenge you and your agencies to go and fill out a CPARS evaluation for those SAT procurements, because that's the best way to get small businesses some past performance ratings that they can then use and carry forward into bigger and bigger procurements. But get away from these cut and dry evaluation factors and focus on the really meaty stuff in your proposal. I'll give you one example, and this is on a very small, certainly SAT level procurement. Bringing in training. I wanted to bring in some training to train up people in facilitation. And one of the evaluation factors, I said, essentially, we're looking for trained, certified facilitators. Preference will be given to companies that can provide this level of facilitation certification to their instructors. So what that does for me is it signals a couple things. One, it opens up the market to anyone who can teach about facilitation, but it adds that additional benefit to those who have accredited international certifications in facilitation. It helps strengthen my confidence that the training that's provided is going to teach all of the things I want facilitators to know about. So it's helping me manage one of the risks that I have, right? By focusing on that specific evaluation factor. What else, Trevor?
I mean, the important thing there, and kind of one of the things that you're getting at, is we can make our evaluation factors whatever we want them to be, right? So you don't have to use these terms. If you want to be very specific, like sometimes you'll see a management approach, and then it's like, well, what do you really want to look at in their management? Well, I really want to see their staffing and transition approaches. We've had a lot of challenges in the past. It's like, okay, let's call this factor staffing and transition approach. And let's be very specific of what we want to see and only ask for that information if that's what's going to make your decision for you. So let's just be straightforward and transparent. You don't have to use these old traditional adjectival ratings. You don't have to use these traditional evaluation factor titles. I think it's just confusing, some way, shape, or form. So let's be creative. Let's craft what's important to our individual procurements. With that being said, go to the next slide.
Yeah, and Trevor, I'm going to have us just kind of skip through this real quick. People can have these questions.
That's it. We don't need to talk about them at all.
Yeah, just know that they're here. These are some targeted questions related to experience or old presentations. You can read them for yourself, think about how you might incorporate them. And thanks to Trevor for spending some time documenting them here in the deck. Folks, we're getting real close to the end here. If you're looking for more information, I want you to go and check out the lab at Commerce. The website's right there. Trevor and his team have a bunch of great resources on their website. Also, the Procurement Innovation Lab, unfortunately, they weren't able to join us today, but they have some great resources at the PIL. So check them out. You can check out more information about the CSAW program and all of the techniques we've talked about. I'm pretty sure. There might have been some things that weren't actual techniques, just best practices. But pretty much everything we talked about today is on the periodic table of acquisition innovations. Go check it out. It's one of the most clean, easy to use websites I think that's ever been developed in the government. I use it all the time. I share it with teams all the time. I'm constantly referencing it. It's got case law. It's got examples, webinars, sample documents, templates. It's everything. It's a gold mine. So go check out the periodic table. And finally, I'm going to end with a little plug. Folks, if you want help with your acquisitions, we have a facilitation team to help you out. It's called the Civilian Service Acquisition Workshop Program. We have trained facilitators that can work with your acquisition team and help you through the requirements development and acquisition strategy process. It's a free service. If you're interested at all in this, check us out. You can go to gsa.gov/CSAW to learn more. This has been our last webinar of FY23. I'm so grateful, Trevor, that you could join us for this today. It's been a blast. For all of you who joined us from around the world, we're so grateful that you joined us and for the questions that you put into chat. We will be taking the questions that were in the Q&A and working on developing a blog article that we will post on our Interact community. And we'll probably try and get to some of the questions that we weren't able to get to today. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. With that, we'll wrap it up. Trevor, any last words?
Nope, you did a good enough job. Thank you all for coming and listening to two Blazers in their glasses talk about innovation.
Fair enough. Thanks, Trevor. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
And John, if you want to stop the recording.
And someone from Bosnia.
That's amazing. I love that.
Mexico City, huh? USAID in the house.
That's right. Representing. All right, Trevor, I got to take off. The recording's still going for whatever reason, but thank you again informally for joining. I really appreciate it. And for the prep work that you put into it. This is great. I can't wait to talk with you in September about our plans for next year.
Yeah. Hey, it all went really well. I'm glad we had the time. Man, a lot of questions. That's good, right? There's a lot of questions.
It's excellent. Excellent.
All right. Take care. Enjoy your vacation. I'll see you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.